tukameka pakwingira mumusumba wa Embo. Tukameka pakwingira mumusumba wa Embo. Tukameka pakwingira mumusumba wa Embo. Tukameka pakwingira mumusumba wa Embo.
Tukameka
pakwingira mumusumba wa Embo.
Okay. So welcome everyone to another session of our ongoing series on harmony of interests. It's been a very important and very, very breathtaking week of international developments. I'll just say a couple of words before introducing Nick. Obviously, just a few days ago, the world was rocked by explosions that emanated out of Lebanon in Beirut. There's a lot of hypotheses about who did it, you know, Mossad, Israeli Defense Forces, other actors are brought up in the hypotheses. The important thing to keep in mind, and I think this is really a vital lesson for everyone, especially in our chaotic times, is that everything is being shaped by the clash of two different paradigms. And that on the one hand, you have a collapsing world order that's run out of the city of London and Wall Street that is a very highly interconnected system of intelligence, of banking, of military affairs, and other, which is seeing, it's sort of at the end of its ropes. And there's a new game in town, and especially across the Middle East, we've seen hope for reconstruction, development, stemming from the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road led by China, which is integrated very much into the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia, which has presented a completely different way of thinking about political economy, where long-term thinking, win-win cooperation, a harmony of interests has replaced the Hobbesian view of each against all in a battle for diminishing returns of resources, which is what we were all born into under the last 40-year state of globalization in the West. So this whole paradigm is much more effective at actually infusing real value into what we allow to be currency in the system. It's the monetary rules, the flows of credit are all tied to building projects which have a measurable impact on elevating the conditions of life of people. And we've seen it really embraced in Iran, in Iraq, and Syria, and Lebanon is a key place where this intersects as a pearl on the Silk Road, obviously, into the Mediterranean. Anybody who's able to create a situation of stability in the zone through infrastructure development, as China has exhibited an intent and a capability, will also be able to present Africa with a new hope. Because anybody who can bring rail infrastructure development to Lebanon, to Israel, to that whole Middle Eastern zone through Jordan, obviously this intersects very much with a ability to bring the East into the West and also into the South, into Africa. And I just wanted to do a quick screen share to open up a concept, which is, I think, of high value. What people are seeing in front of their screens is an image published in an 1890 fantastic book by William Gilpin, called The Cosmopolitan Railway, Economic, Just, and Correct Map of the World is what he calls it. Gilpin was a statesman, the first governor of the state of Colorado before it became a state. His work in the Civil War was instrumental in preserving the Union and keeping the South from running a Western flank while Lincoln was doing battle with the North and with the South. There were several attempts to have a Western flank, and Gilpin was on the frontier and managed to put that down. He was a person who, since the 1840s, was an advocate of continental rail development, following the John Quincy Adams vision for continental development of America, especially the transcontinental rail. And again, he had hosted dozens of conferences, of petitions, and of positive propaganda work to help Americans understand why they needed to get off of a reliance on sea trade that was monopolized by the British and really develop inland. So this is his entire life this was his devotion. By the end of it, it culminated through his contacts with Russia, with Tsar Alexander III's networks in Russia that were in the midst of building their Trans-Siberian Railway, using American expertise and also engineering and production. There was an understanding that the next phase of human evolution was going to be through the Bering Strait and through connecting all nations and all cultures of the world with rail and new industrial development corridors. Cynthia last week went through a beautiful presentation on Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass, the most striking thing that really stood out to me in the course of that was that Douglass's fight was so much more deep than people realize today. It wasn't just the political emancipation of African Americans from slavery. It was also very much connected in Douglass's mind to the emancipation of all humankind through the rejection of free trade and the application of industrial development projects, which was, in his understanding, the American system of political economy, as it is not practiced in universities anymore. This is what Douglass in the 1870s and 1880s and 90s also, along with Gilpin, was representing as a fight to liberate all of mankind from systems of empire and allow each nation and each culture to become sovereign. And in so doing, recognize that everybody's individual interest is actually located in the interests of your neighbor. So this represents the best principles of Confucianism, of Christian charity, the best principles of Hinduism. We've seen this touched upon in various cultures of the world, and this truth is something which the empire has been working very hard to destroy and obscure. They're obsessed. So this should have, as we see, been what defined the 20th century, this international work of rail development. This is a picture of Gilpin himself at a younger age. There's a small quote before I open up for Nick here, but Gilpin, just to illustrate in words what he was thinking, he's describing his vision of railways which continue to extend themselves, soon to be a universal system all over the lands of the globe. We have seen the energies of the American people bringing into line and into use these new powers, span their continent with the Pacific railways, as with the rapidity of lightning from a mountain loud, availing themselves of the favorable thermal warmth of the plateau and upon the immediate sea coasts bathed by the Asiatic Gulf Stream, they will continue to expand their work to the Bering Straits, where all the continents are united. This will extend itself along similarly propitious thermal selvage of the Oriental Russian coasts into China, to prolong this unbroken line of cosmopolitan railways along the latitudinal plateau of Asia to Moscow and to London will not have long delay. The less significant and isolated continents of the Southern Hemisphere, South America, Africa, and Australasia will be reached by feeders through the Panama, Suez, and the chain of Oriental peninsulas and islands. The whole area and all the populations of the globe will be thus united and fused by land, travel, and railway. Let me just end the. So that, I think, really should pose a question in the mind of any researcher. Why didn't this happen? This is all of the leading figures of the world, from Otto von Bismarck to Alexander III to Sadi Carnot to figures in China and beyond, were understood that this was the next natural phase of human evolution. Why didn't this happen? What stopped it? So I think with that answer can best be addressed by my good friend Nicholas Jones, who we have the pleasure of having with us today. And Nicholas, as I've set out in the bio, is a professional dancer who's worked around the world. He is the president, along with his partner Julia, who together founded 2 years ago the Artists Alliance for Africa nonprofit, which is a foundation based here in Montreal. Nicholas has worked periodically in Africa every year for several weeks at a time, working with other organizations to help bring about classical culture, training, the arts into the slums of Kenya and beyond. Nick has a broader vision, which he intends to manifest into reality that is very much in alignment with this new Silk Road, new paradigm that we're on the cusp of currently. Nick has done probably more work than anybody that I personally know on Africa, its history and its future. And so with that, I'd like to leave the platform here to Nick. Nick, it is all yours. I'm making you the host as we speak. You are now host and can only let people in as you see fit.
Okay. Share screen.
The screen share, if you've missed it, it's at the bottom of your screen. Oh, you got it. All right.
Present. Does everybody see?
Yep. Absolutely.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful introduction. I will try and do that as much justice as possible. So let's get cracking because we have a lot of content to get through today. I have started with two maps here. One on your left, which is probably not so familiar to most people. And you'll probably notice as well that the words are upside down. That can be blamed on how old the map is and the fact that it hasn't been updated for obvious reasons, which we'll get into now. The one on the right is what happened in after the Berlin Conference of 1888, which was also labeled the Scramble for Africa. You can see the partitioning of Africa into, you know, basic colonial land masses. And this is how the empire basically managed to control Africa and basically stymie the rise of any potential independence ideas or Republican ideas that were coming out of America at the end of the 18th century. So, yeah, I think it's clear to everyone that the one on the left, you can see a lot of kingdoms, nation states. Now, due to its age, I'm starting this presentation today from, I'm going to do a little bit now on the slave trade, just to give us a very short background on that, and then we're going to move into the 1888 Berlin Conference and the ramifications of that. So, a short history on the colonial occupation of Africa. The first ship leaves from Portugal to Africa to transport slaves to Brazil in 1526. At least this is the date we are given. There's a long period of 300 years where over 15 million Africans are transported across the Atlantic and roughly 2.2 million died as a result of the voyages. Ships had around 300 to 600 on board, and the voyage was around 2.5 months. So we're all aware of these conditions. They were awful. This is the nature of empire. They will permit anything to make a quick buck or to meet their short-term ends, whatever they may be. Then the slave trade then operates along the coastline, which is important to note, along the coastline of Africa for 300 years, ending sometime around 1850, 1860, at least in law, it ended then, but economically it did not end, hence why Africa is still in poverty today. Following the British and United States bans on African slave trade in 1808 and 1853, it declined, but the period after still accounted for 28.5% of the total volume of the Atlantic slave trade. So this makes it clear that even though it was banned, it did still continue, and the economics of it was still very much in place. It did not shut down. The East India Trading Company did continue to exist for another well, after Britain ended in 1808, the East India Trading Company actually managed to exist up until the 70s. So, and they were operating largely out of London. At least that was where their corporation was based. Yeah, the USA and its individual states passed laws banning the importation of slaves. Thomas Jefferson's state of Virginia bans the import of slaves for sale in 1778. But of course, they could still bring slaves, just not for trading. So yeah, they monopolized their slave trade, so to speak, for themselves. But of course, yeah, that's also black and white. We could go more into that, and I'm going to make that a bit clearer as we go through this. That's not an end in and of itself, and we all know well the founding of America did set forth the correct principles as to how nations were to go about gaining their independence. So, and then, yeah, slavery abolished in the UK by Prime Minister William Wilberforce. He was a Quaker and an evangelist. In 1807, and like I said before, the East India Company and the Royal African Company continued to flood the Americas with slaves for another 50 years or so. But actually even longer. The last ship that entered into America, it was an illegal ship called the Clotilde, as written here. And that actually continued to happen, you know, due to the complication of the time in America with Lincoln's fight for the Union and so on and so forth. It's pretty hard to know the accurate numbers behind that, you know, given the chaos that was taking place at the time. So East India Trading Company, because these are really the important factors in the slave trade. Britain as a country, of course, most citizens, working class or normal citizens, would find in any age and would find the practice of slavery abhorrent. I think that's pretty obvious to most people. What they don't understand is why then these things continue to happen. And I think we have to understand the economics of this kind of system, and that's why I've done a little page here on the East India Trading Company, just to make the point that it's these corporations that are basically, you could say, holding a hand over the British government. And I'm not saying that the British government was, innocent. It's just, it's never really been a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I think I got that right. It's always been a government for the interests of a selected few within that society or nation. So up until today, it's still not a nation state. It still does not have independence, at least an independence that is for the people. So these corporations, they continue to operate even though the justice system in both America and the UK have decided that slavery is, of course, a bad thing and have made it illegal. They continue to operate their businesses. So the East India Trading Company was founded in 1600. It's actually a late starter because the Spanish and Portuguese had already been doing it around 70, 60 years. But what you see is in just before the 1600 period, there is the Spanish Armada. There is a great big battle between England and Spain. And we win for multiple reasons. Walter Raleigh, who was a brilliant admiral at the time, and Francis Drake were very astute and clever men, and had, through design and through their creativity, had designed ships that were better at maneuvering around the Spanish ships. And so therefore, simply put, we managed to win and outmaneuver them. And after that, you can see that there was a period in Britain where certain people, due to their greed, wanted to replace the Spanish and Portuguese and basically pick up from where they left off. But actually, Queen Elizabeth resisted at first. So in the first instance, when they come to her, there's a group of merchants that come to her and they ask her for the permission to conduct these kind of trades. At first, she resists. And she says, no, basically, that's not what I'm down for. That's not what my education is. And but they get, and we see this a lot with our monarchies, that then even they are not really in control of their countries. The invisible hand working behind them is very much in control. And these merchants basically go about creating unofficial ways of conducting that trade without the knowledge of the monarchy. Later on, the monarchy catches on, and eventually through, pressure and whatnot, political pressure, she gives in and she allows the trade to go on, uncontended. So both are default extensions of the British Empire and sought to dominate the shipping routes and gateways around the world. They were successful in doing that. They took over the Suez Canal. They took over the Malacca Straits in Malaysia, Singapore, what is today that. Ruler of the seas, rule Britannia. So that was the way that we could as an empire, basically force other nations through trade restrictions and basically controlling the flow of information. I wouldn't just say trade, I would say the flow of information in the world. And basically making sure that backward peoples from different cultures, regardless of whatever level that was, or level of backwardness that was, they were stopped from partaking in the natural processes of economy, and basically making quantum leaps in their understanding of technological and economic processes in society or in nations. And so they were treated like, whenever we were creating our empire and we were taking control of these land masses, India, South Africa, Kenya, Australia, Canada, with the roles of Canada and Australia, it's quite different for obvious reasons, because those nations became colonized by Europeans, whereas the other nations like India and so forth, due to the number of people, this is something that Sun Yat-sen has spoken about, due to the number of people in those nations, it was very hard to actually physically colonize them or insert their own people, basically like an ethnic cleansing. It's very hard, like it's basically impossible for them to do that when a country has 300 or 400 million people. Also, I mean, the role of culture comes into play. So, you know, India having a very, very strong culture, you know, a very long ancient history, was by and large impossible to colonize. The only way they could do it is economically. And the same applies with Africa, though a lot of people don't know that. They're not very aware of Africa's ancient cultures. And as much as I would have loved to have gone in that today, it's just not possible due to the size of it. The EIC is also involved in the Opium Wars, and largely tied to India, due to India being the jewel of the empire, with its seemingly unlimited amount of resources. You see that actually, this is where I say the EIC is basically almost a state in and of itself, much in the way that corporations have as much money as certain nations today. The EIC actually ruled, they actually ruled India for 100 years, between 1757 and 1858. So it wasn't even the British government, it was a corporation controlling this country. And I've added there Burma as well, just to give some more context as to how widespread this is going on. So now I'm going to move, that's the foundation of what's been going on for 300 years. And now we very, very quickly, we hit 1888. And the European colonial powers have decided, or they've realized, that basically Africa is this continent of, you know, enormous wealth and potential. And here comes an irony, because you would think, when you look at potential, if you're a Christian, which Europeans were largely still in those days, you didn't have many atheists, and most people were, or at least probably were, reading the Bible. And so one may ask themselves, like, well, how does that fit into Christian morals? I mean, creates a bit of a contest, doesn't it, in our mind? And you start to see, like, were these elites even really Christian at all? Or even did these elites even have a Bible? It's hard to believe, isn't it, when they're going about partitioning entire continents into their own, you know, drawing borders where they see fit, depending on natural resources and not on the livelihood of peoples. I mean, this is very, very strange, because there's not much about that in the Bible. So the moral standards of the time were definitely lacking. And even though Otto von Bismarck was actually heading the conference, which is another irony, we somehow completely evade our morals, and we go about, you know, taking this action without any kind of thought of the African people or you know, their well-being. So here you see a drawing of the Berlin Conference. There you see, over on the far right side, that's Otto von Bismarck with his lovely bald head. very obvious for most. And over here we see on the left well, this is Madagascar actually. This is a large map of Africa, and there you see them talking in the room about, you know, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that, what are you going to take, you know, so on and so forth. We can all use our imaginations to put ourselves as a fly on the wall in that room and kind of imagine what the kind of discussion was taking place. It's also important to note that there's not a single African in the room. So yeah, it's clear as night and day. So what happens at this Berlin conference in this so-called Scramble for Africa? So 1888, the Berlin Conference makes the decision to partition Africa into parts and occupy those parts as colonial masters. The nations who partook are the UK, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, which was still Prussia, I think, at the time, Austria-Hungary, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Russia, and the US was actually an observer state at this conference, but they did not partake in the partitioning of Africa. It's 1888. We all know about Lincoln, so there's probably a very good reason why there. And that reason probably was that, well, the US probably saw what was going on, and maybe at that time did not have the power, coming off of the back of a pretty tumultuous time, did not maybe have the power to kind of lead events to the right moral cause. And so therefore the Europeans dominated this conference, and they probably only let the US in as an observer state, actually, to reduce their role in their potential ability to lead events to the right cause. So therefore decisions were made without the participation of those African nations, whom up until that point had already been largely self-governing kingdoms or city-states. I just want to mention here that due to the slave trade, some people might get confused about that. Well, like I said, it was mainly being conducted along the coastline of West Africa. So you're talking from Morocco down to the bottom of Congo, largely. And also note that, you know, people are largely the same wherever you go. And there were certain kingdoms in Africa that did participate, or at least, you know, saw that they could make some potential wealth from the slave trade. So they did actually participate in the selling of slaves themselves. And so what they would do is basically, if they had a criminal within their kingdom or in their city-state or nation-state, they would basically sell that criminal off as a slave. I'll continue. Up until then, the slave trade had conducted itself a lot. Yeah, so I've said this. So with 1888, with the Berlin Conference, now Africa as a landmass becomes colonized in full. So, and this was really bad for the Europeans as well. And this is something that Cynthia was drawing on last week with Frederick Douglass, that both the master and the slave are suffering, because neither is really, neither is progressing. They're both infected with this, awful way of thinking, this awful ideology, and so it stymies the progress of both individuals and both ideologies, or both situations are actually finding themselves more in resistance to this reality than in coherence or in a union with it. Like I found excerpts of like sailors who were on the ships during the slave trade, and they hate it. Of course, they're like any other people. They really do not like being on these ships. As you can imagine, you're there with 600 slaves all in chains, sweating, and it was a long journey, and people were getting sick, and the possibility of death was a 12.5, so they say 12.5% mortality rate on these voyages. So you had a 1 in 10 chance of dying. That's pretty, in those days, that's pretty high. given that you didn't have much to resist death. So yeah, and also to draw more is to say, well, yeah, first of all, it pits these, because they're playing the master, they're playing the oppressor, they're all trying to play the oppressor. Well, normally there can only be one oppressor. There's got to be, in an ideology like that, there's got to be a winner and a loser. And so it pits the European states against each other. So we see the foundation of the Peace of Westphalia and so on and so forth, these kind of founding or guiding principles were largely tossed out of the window at this point. And we really do start looking towards the short-term gain of extorting entire people. Yeah. So it's a bit problematic, and I know as Europeans, it's something for me that we have a bit of crisis of identity, because whenever I think about this, I always ask myself as a Christian, like, well, we're going through an industrial revolution at this time, no? And it's just such a unwelcome paradox that, you know, while in the West you have all of these discoveries and you know, exhibitions that are being set up in New York and London and so on and so forth, and you're seeing inventors and discoverers turn up, and they're talking about these new lands that they've discovered and these new resources, and how they're going to use those resources to make new technology and to discover new sciences and new principles to progress the people of, you know, the West. Why it was never extended, why that level of thinking was never extended to the whole, which is what Christianity is very clearly telling us to do. And I can only think of the tale of the Good Samaritan here, that it's so important that if we're, you know, like, it's the motto of the Rising Tide Foundation, a rising tide lifts all boats. Why are we not, as Christians, when we're discovering all these things, sharing these discoveries with our brethren in Africa, who are basically the resource providers for these discoveries? To make that point clear, 60% of the gold in the USA today comes from Africa. So why is the wealth that is being taken as a raw resource out of Africa then not being put back in the form of knowledge? Because I think any one of us here who understands economics, extortion in and of itself is not a problem, but extortion for selfish means is a problem. And if you're extorting a resource for the greater good, to bring about a benefit for greater standards of living for the entire populace, then of course that's clearly a good thing. And the likelihood is that the way you'll go about extorting that resource will also be of a moral code. But when it's done for selfish means and for profit margins and so on and so forth, the individual is not doing it for the greater good, he's simply doing it for his own self, and so therefore his level of thinking will be contracted, and he'll only see short-term gains rather than long-term gains. And he'll go about basically doing things immorally, because already in that ideology he's contracted his thinking, so he's unable to even consider, you could argue, the morality of such a thing. Take someone like George Soros today, who is a prime example of this, when he talks about it so unabashedly and has no shame whatsoever. Douglas Schulek Miller, wouldn't that have something to do with the fact that most of the resource companies? Right, exactly, yeah, Douglas, you're correct. I'll just answer that because he put that as a question just now, everyone. Yeah, that would have something to do with the fact that these companies are centered in the city of London, which is in and of itself a corporation. Yeah, he says the godless empire. So an empire without morality, without any standards of morality, no code. One of the major ironies is that while the West was witnessing, yeah, sorry, I went through this. I'm going to go to the next slide. So that's the Berlin Conference. I could, of course, go into it more, but you know, I want to get on with Pan-Africanism because this is where the discussion of independence, both elements of independence, spiritual independence, or you could say physical independence, like escaping an occupation, is one side of independence. But the other side of independence is something which is not so clear to the eye, and that's largely economic. Are the processes of your state independent? Are they independent of outside or foreign manipulation? Is your mind independent? Is your education system independent as a nation? Are your people thinking independently? Not just sensually, because that's obvious to all of us. When there's a revolution and we've become tired of oppression, yet it's easy to go out in the street and shout about it, as we see today. But how do we get from an A to a B? Because simply just voicing your discontent sensually will not bring about the greater standards of living that all people wish to see. The only thing that can do that is an order of like a form of society, and this is the role of economics. How do we order our nations to bring about those higher standards of living for the greater good and not just for the few? So Pan-Africanism is basically the label given to the arrival of this kind of independent thinking on the African continent, and this is born out of the 1776 Declaration of Independence in the United States of America, and I'm going to go about making that link right now. So here we have a picture of Kwame Nkrumah on the left side, who is my focal point for today, actually, because out of all of them, he is the one with probably the most astute brain and the most accurate adaptation of that Declaration of Independence for Africa. And so he really did have a plan set out, a vision, and we're going to see from him later some speeches and some transcripts that will very clearly show that. On the right top hand corner, we have Thomas Sankara. He comes later, actually, after Nkrumah. They did cross paths at one point when Sankara was very, very young, I think. But my main point here is Sankara is of a different nature. He's younger than Nkrumah. He is, you know, younger, therefore more sensual. And so from the outside, you know, at first he may come across as a bit of communist or Marxist. But if you listen to him speak, especially, you'll see that he's not of that, not entirely of that nature. And it's more down to the social situation at the time and the drastic situation in Burkina Faso at the time that we see him appear as more socialist than Republican. Because, of course, a lot of his policies were mostly social, but he did have, or he did exhibit the economic policies to go with that as well. So that's where I draw a line under communism, because communism doesn't raise the standard of living for the greater good. Communism's form of equality is a sensual equality, like a literal physical equality, which is impossible. But they try to force it regardless because communism, you know, in and of itself is well known that it was created, or Karl Marx was funded and created to basically throw off the good intentions of young revolutionaries who are willing or sought the change of, you know, the change of imperial powers, and to get rid of those imperial powers. Where it failed is it becomes overly sensual and largely violent by default. And so you know, you have like Jacobin mob kind of process go on. But that's not what happens with Sankara. So we're going to see that later. And you'll always see him in military facades. So always people call him the young Che Guevara. He's a different man. So we have Haile Selassie on the bottom right as well, talking with Jomo Kenyatta. Haile Selassie is the leader of, he's actually a monarch of Ethiopia, and sometime I would like to give a class in and of itself to Haile Selassie, because he's such an important figure that I mean they all are, but because Ethiopia never got colonized, Ethiopia in and of itself is would be such a great class to give, and I would like to go into more specifics on that. So anyway, here you see them talking, and we can only imagine what they're talking about, but it looks fun. And even the guy stood in the back have a small smile on their face. So Pan-Africanism, the dawn of freedom. Here I'm going to do a quick run of a timeline of events, also for myself to get in order. So we have the 1888 Scramble for Africa Berlin Conference, as we've just spoken about before. Then in 1923, Martin Garvey, who I'm not going to go into now because I haven't made a decision of whether this guy's basically, well, whether he's, I'm sure that he's well-intended, but his ideology maybe misses the point a bit. But anyway, in 1923, Martin Garvey first coins the phrase United States of Africa in his poem, Hail United States of Africa, which you can all go and read in your own time if you wish. It is, you'll make of it what you do. Then in 1938-45, we have World War II, in which Africa plays a critical role. Soldiers are recruited there by the empires. Resources are taken as is the going norm up until this point. But we have the arrival of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who makes a very timely intervention into the current events that are taking place at the time. And the empires, after this Second World War, they want to continue the status quo, but Franklin has other ideas, and this is well documented in his son's memoirs as he saw it. And Matt actually did a brilliant article on that some months back, which everyone should read. Then we have the 5th Pan-African Congress, which takes place in Manchester, ironically also in 1945. This is a kind irony, and this is probably off of the back of what Roosevelt set as he restates the intention of the Declaration of Independence and the foundation of the United States, and makes it very clear in the foreign policy of the United States of America the difference between America as a nation state and America as an empire, and also, of course, in opposition to the British Empire. So we see in his discussions with Churchill the absolute, and I say in no other words, absolute opposition of their foreign policies. Roosevelt is a Hamiltonian economist. He is very much in the business of developing peoples who are in backward states to raise their standards of living, not just their standards of living, raise their standards of knowledge, and to give them a real sense of independence in their minds so that they can be the individuals that go and, you know, bring about the creative discoveries that are going to shift their nations independently by themselves, or like not by themselves, but of course with the help of outside hands, but in a way which instead of like coming down on top of them, comes underneath them and lifts them up, like this rising tide mantra, this kind of idea of how you lift something from underneath rather than pulling it up. You can actually feed it and nourish it and give it the tools so that itself can actually sustain its own survival in a way which is brings about lots of prosperity and so on and so forth. So this Pan-African Congress takes place, and The first one took place in London in 1900, but it had very little effect. The empire was still very strong at that point. Not much got done. It wasn't up until the fifth one takes place in Manchester that we really start to see a move towards independence. And like I say, this is largely due to Roosevelt's influence at the time, the spirit that he embodied and is being felt by other people in the planet. So 200 attendants are at that Congress, 87 delegates. These are the first time we see numbers like this at Pan-African Congress. Up until that point, a lot of people didn't take much interest. There's some guys who, some leaders who are trying to get it together, but to very little effect. And one of the men at this Pan-African Congress is a very young Kwame Nkrumah, who has just left America after 10 years of studying at the Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. He has just left America and he's come to Manchester, and he's partaking in this Congress. And it's off the back of that Congress that the Pan-African Federation is formed. And that's Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta, the leader of Kenya. By the way, Nkrumah is the president of Ghana. Not yet, but will be. Him and Kenyatta are pivotal in the formation of a Pan-African Federation. So they now have a foundation for basically organizing other African leaders into this federation and to start beginning the process of gaining their independence. So fast forward 13 years, 1958, Ghana becomes the first nation in Africa, Ghana being led by Kwame Nkrumah, becomes the first nation to take her independence back from the British Empire. I would also like to note that though there was some upheaval, and there is always a certain amount of chaos when we have revolutions, largely the way that this took place was mostly peaceful. Like, it didn't turn into a war. You had basically sporadic periods of violence on the street and so on and so forth, but it didn't spiral into Jacobin mobs pulling down courthouses and so on and so forth. So Kwame manages to intervene into the natural central processes of revolution and provide the vision very quickly and very astutely, and he provides this massive vision for Ghana, and basically through his speeches and having that direct transmission with his populace and with his people, he steps into that role as leader and goes about peacefully organizing for the gaining of independence for Ghana. And he does this in a very political way with minimal violence. So then in 1963, the Organization of the African Union is created under the leadership of Nkrumah again. So this is why this man is so important. And then we have disbanded, the OAU is then disbanded in 2002 to make way for the African Union, which is basically a continuance. They just wanted to update the articles and basically to modernize the goals of the union, but they largely stayed the same. And we're going to talk about that more later, because we know that African Union has a vision for 2030, also for 2063, which is largely aligned with China's Belt and Road Initiative. And just as a side thing, well, not side thing, it is directly connected. In 1967, I should mention the British Empire uses the University of Dar es Salaam and holds a symposium there. And basically certain leaders on the African continent are fooled into following a counter-politic, using the doctrines of Marxism and communism to enact a sort of divide and conquer strategy on the continent amongst these newly independent African nation states. Because the empire knew, like, of course, if, this is a very natural process of mankind. If we let this go unhindered, we are going to basically lose control of the narrative. And so they had to, yeah, like they had to find a way in, so to speak, like a counterculture, a mode of thinking that would distract people and take their sensual whims and manipulate them into basically violent political action. So that's what you start to see with some of the African nation states. They start to become, during this time, they start to become like anti-African, actually, and they start to have wars with one another, and they start fueling wars and funneling weapons into each other, like certain ones. I'm talking about Museveni in Uganda, or Paul Kagame. Like, we all know about genocides that happened in Rwanda and Uganda, or at least have heard of them, I hope. So that's how those things came about. Again, we could go into that more, but due to time, we're going to have to move through. But I encourage everyone to look into those things with a magnifying glass, because you will very quickly see with most of them that these leaders did have good intentions, but they were thrown off board. And then due to that, they then started interfering in each other's affairs in a not so nice way. And instead of helping each other develop and coordinating with each other to build train lines, they started coordinating against each other to fund wars and conflict, basically. So they were taught the kind of thinking which is like the same empirical imperial thinking which empires embody. Here's another nice picture. This is in Addis Ababa at that same OAU conference, Organization of African Union. So in the middle here, we have Jomo Kenyatta next to Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. This is Patrice Lumumba, who is one of the middle leaders that I talked about, who basically got thrown off board. Very good intentions, but then he, later on, it turned violent. Yeah, I will not try and reason with that right now, but Congo is a huge country, and I'm sure you can all understand the complex situation that still exists there today, actually. Congo, they really don't want Congo to become independent, and there are some really profound reasons for that. If people looked at Congo economically, they would immediately understand why. We also have, this I believe is Kwame Nkrumah. It's surprising he's not at the front, but he wasn't that kind of guy anyway. Who else can we recognize? This I think is Museveni. Matt, do you recognize any? Oh, this is Julius Nyerere. Again, well-intentioned leader. You can see he's a good, like, nice man, but the empire managed to get into his brain and breed, yeah, violence again and division and conflict. But yeah, that's not full in and of itself. He shows some ironies, but yeah, he doesn't go the same way as Museveni goes, for example, who became like an outright dictator. But yeah, he certainly lets those events take place. Up here we have Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. Now this guy is not a leader, should have been, didn't become one, but he was a scientist in Senegal, and I put his picture there basically to embody what could and what should have been the potential political leaders of Africa. He was certainly one of them. He was a philosopher as well as a scientist. He's a very well-rounded individual. And below in the right hand, we have obviously Madiba, Nelson Mandela. So here is a GIF that I downloaded of the rate of independence. And we'll just let that run through a couple of times. And you guys can just check that out for a moment while I take a drink. Sorry?
I think that somebody, either Dave or somebody else, might need to be on mute or go on mute.
Yeah.
Maybe Kathleen. Oh, thanks.
I mean, if anybody has a question up until now, feel free.
Stephen here. I threw a question up on the chat.
Sure.
But regarding 67 and University of Dar es Salaam and the Marxism, I am not a great historian or a great scholar, so take my words with a grain of salt, please. It reminds me of scholar Anthony Sutton's work exposing that the same Wall Street big financial actors were not only behind financing the Bolshevik Revolution, but also the Nazis. And it's like deja vu all over again, and almost goes back to your recurring themes in history.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your reasoning, and I would accept that as the probable cause. These themes, they continue to repeat themselves because the empire knows a method very well, and it's, you know, if it works, they, you know, continue using it, and they do that to you know, varying degrees of success. But up until today, I mean, the only area where you can say it really didn't work, at least in the foundation of that nation, was America, and even there it got thrown, you know, we all know that the chaos that is entailed in their short history. So yeah, I would agree with that, and I can't say for sure, but yeah, it was being financed by empire, at least. And I know that people like, for example, the participants of the University of Dar es Salaam, like Museveni, Afwerki, Garang, all of these guys. Afwerki is the former leader of Eritrea. That was very much funded by London. So by default, London, Wall Street, same thing. They're connected and have been connected for a very long time. So yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. I didn't want to derail it. Just was wondering if you're thinking along those lines. So appreciate the response.
No, thank you. It adds to the context, and great. So yeah, we can see that the rate of independence, it starts mostly on the west side rapidly. Like I said, with Ghana. We're going to get back to the beginning in just a sec. And
I have a question, Nick.
Go on.
Unless you're going to go through an overview, but I noticed that there's one country that never seems to get independence on that map. Are you going to, which country is that? I'm a little ignorant on my app.
Okay, so that's Western Sahara, which still, as of today, is not a United Nations. I don't think it's recognized as of yet.
But it's not a colony as such in the old definition of the term, right?
No, it's kind of well, the thing is, I don't know enough about it to answer that accurately. As far as I know, at the moment, they're a rebel band of people who are trying to create an independent state of Morocco at the same time as Morocco is trying to unify them or incorporate them into the state of Morocco, or into the kingdom of Morocco, because it still is a kingdom, sorry, not the state. So yeah, that's Western Sahara. It's undeveloped. I've looked at pictures, I've tried to see if anything's happening there. Morocco is actually trying to do some water desalination projects and so on and so forth just across the border as a kind of arm, extending an arm, so to speak. At least that's the way I see it. I wouldn't see it as an occupation because it's just across the border. I think they're basically reaching out to say, like, let's join hands in the path of development. But I'm an optimist, and there might be more to it than that. And So that's all I have to say on that. Any more questions, anyone, while we're here? No? Okay, so where am I? I want to talk about America a little bit more. So at this time, while this Pan-Africanism, this wave of independence, probably the question will spring to mind. Why? Well, like, I mean, and why now? Well, okay, it's been 80 years and Africa's all carved up and, you know, oppressed. So that's the central reason. That's obvious. Like, people rise up after a certain period of oppression. They have enough, so to speak. Also, yeah, as I said before, World War II has just taken place, and it's caused a lot of pain and suffering around the world, and it's becoming clear to people, as I think in the moment, as to why World War II happened. So I think for a lot of nations that were outside of the European continent, looking back in, they were maybe more aware that the empire was actually dictating the events and kind of funding both sides of the coin. And so when you have someone like Roosevelt, who's very clearly stating a different kind of foreign policy than what America had up and, or like for the previous 30 years, other leaders are recognizing the moment, and they're thinking, well, they're very much reminded of the original goal of America through Roosevelt. We see the re-envisioning of that potential in him, and so for them, I guess, it becomes obvious once more that this is the path, this is the best path towards independence. And that's why I want to make a distinction between, you know, Marxism and communism and a republic, because often historians will tell us that Pan-African leaders lean towards Marxism, and you'll see it all over Wikipedia everywhere. And it's probably also due to the Cold War thing at the time. Like, basically anybody who didn't agree with NATO imperial policy, you're a Marxist. Like, you've got to be. It's like, if you don't agree with us, well, you got to be the other. But this is where they bet. This is where they, you know, manipulate history or kind of lead us away from the truth, because they're basically making it look like a one side against the other. And it's not that, actually. Like, in America, in the foundation of those principles, you see the unification of both sides of our brain, like between the sense and the moral. And of course, we all know that a revolution starts sensually, and it's brought about through emotions, but then you shift to a higher process of thinking, and you embody morality as to how about you're going to gain that independence, not violently, but through the benefit of your people, and actually raising them individually to become the standard or the benchmark to follow. So these African leaders, okay, on the surface of it, yeah, it does look, you know, because of course coming from poverty, a lot of the policies are largely social, and in the first instance, that's the first thing that they got to sort out, right? You know, people are dying from lack of water, lack of food. You know, you have 10% literacy rates or 92% illiteracy rates, however you wish to look at it. It's very hard to build a democratic republic like this. You know, they're not starting from the same place as America. You know, America already had an educated populace when it started its revolution. Africa's got illiteracy rates that the world's never seen before, you could argue. I mean, at least hasn't seen since at least, well, thousands of years on the European continent. Dark Ages is an exception. But I don't know if it even literacy. So who are those people? Nkrumah is one such man. He's clearly led by the founding fathers of the USA, studied 10 years in Lincoln, as I mentioned earlier, Lincoln University, Pennsylvania. And I don't know if Matt wants to mention something about this because I didn't have time, but he was in discussions with leading figures in the US, such as Paul Robeson. So Matt, if you would like, just to say a quick little thing on that, I invite you, and now's your cue.
Well, I wouldn't really have too much to add. I mean, you've been doing a great job, but yeah, Nkrumah did study in the United States. And he, along with other African leaders, a little before World War II and during, had taken the time to investigate the Tennessee Valley Authority, the various New Deal projects that were built under Roosevelt, as a model and inspiration for what they had intended to bring back to Africa. Do you want me to say anything about Paul Robeson?
Sure.
Paul Robeson in 1938 created the American Institute for African Affairs, sort of, I think, a little jab at the British Royal Institute for various countries' affairs that Chatham House had created earlier, as a way to sort of, screw over nations' aspirations for development. Well, Paul Robeson spearheaded this institution, which Nkrumah was a part of. He saw Paul Robeson as a great inspiration, and Robeson worked very hard at a couple of these conferences that he spearheaded in America, alongside Nkrumah, who participated, to try to carve out a foreign policy commitment for America, driven by Roosevelt's vision for internationalizing the New Deal and destroying colonialism. So it's very clear when you actually read the resolutions by these conferences that were drafted by Paul Robeson and voted up and passed all the way up until 1944, while Roosevelt was still alive. The clarity of mind of what these people intended for Africa and all nations of the world. So yeah, Nkrumah was a big part of that.
And he also invited Robeson to be a part of, or to teach in the university in Ghana, right? You were telling me yesterday.
That's right. Yeah, after Robeson had suffered, was victimized by 2 years of MK Ultra deprogramming, depatterning in Britain, and was finally rescued by some of his friends and family in 1960 or 61. He was brought back a bit of a shell of a man, and his friend Nkrumah, at a certain point in the early 60s, offered him a post to run a major university in Ghana, and just get out of Cold War America and just do that. But Robeson was not equipped at that time to accept that offer, unfortunately.
So that's thank you, Matt. That's a really nice side note, and I think draws another connection between what is happening and what happened in 1776. So Nkrumah, he envisions a one-party state, which is the original intention of the US. This is because he says it's the faster way to achieve development for the people and will lead to less reactionary politics. He wants to achieve national unity and raise the morality of the nation by doing this. He also wants to guard the newly created nation from the Marxist tendency of counter-revolutions. Sankara had the same issue to deal with later, and he states it very clearly in a speech that we're going to listen to later too. And the other such leaders are Kenyatta of Kenya, Sheikh Anta Diop of Senegal, who's not actually a leader but a scientist and was very influential. He has written many, many books. I encourage anyone to buy any single one of those. You also have Gamal Nasser Hussein of Egypt, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, who comes later and is probably more lonely in his call for this independence. Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, Ahmed Sekou Touré of Guinea as well, who Nkrumah worked so closely with in helping Guinea get their independence that when Nkrumah finally, after 6 years of being leader, got ousted in a coup d'etat while he was away in Burkina Faso, once instantly offered the vice presidency of Guinea from his friend Ahmed, after having fought so diligently for Guinea's independence from France. So he really helped that struggle, so much so that they offered him the vice presidency. Yeah. Just want to go back here. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, we can move on. So, yes, those are the leaders I've given you, and now I'm going to take you through some this transcript of Nkrumah speaking, and I'm going to ask, would someone like to read this, or I'm happy doing it if you want, but if anybody would like to.
I vote for Cynthia.
All right, me too. That's 2 votes and a win.
All right.
Take it away.
You have to read on that screen.
Yep. Hi. We have the resources. It was colonialism in the first place that prevented us from accumulating the effective capital. But we ourselves have failed to make full use of our power and independence. To mobilize our resources for the most effective takeoff into thoroughgoing economic and social development. We have been too busy nursing our separate states to understand fully the basic need of our union, rooted in common purpose, common planning, and common endeavor. A union that ignores these fundamental necessities will be but a shame. It is only by uniting our productive capacity and the resultant production that we can amass capital. And once we start, the momentum will increase. With capital controlled by our own banks, harnessed to our own true industrial and agricultural development, we shall make our advance. We shall accumulate machinery and establish steelworks, iron foundries and factories. We shall link the various states of our continent with communications. We shall astound the world with our hydroelectric power, and we shall drain marshes and swamps, clear infested areas, feed the undernourished, and rid our people of parasites and disease. It is within the possibility of science and technology to make even the Sahara bloom into a vast field with verdant vegetation for agricultural and industrial developments. We shall harness the radio, television, giant printing presses to lift our people from the dark recesses of illiteracy. Kwame Nkrumah.
Thank you. So that makes it very clear to us. So I will add nothing further. I'm going to read another quote where he talks specifically about America. When the first Congress of the United States met many years ago at Philadelphia, one of the delegates sounded the first chore of unity by declaring that they had met in a state of nature, in other words. They were not at Philadelphia as Virginians or Pennsylvanians, but simply as Americans. This reference to themselves as Americans was in those days a new and strange experience. May I dare to assert equally on this occasion, Your Excellencies, that we meet here today not as Ghanaians, Guineans, Egyptians, Algerians, Moroccans, Malians, Liberians, Congolese, or Nigerians, but as Africans. Africans, united in our resolve to remain here until we have agreed on the basic principles of a new compact of unity among ourselves, which guarantees for us and future a new arrangement of continental government. This quote alone should put to rest any ideas that Nkrumah was a Marxist or communist, as some not so diligent historians have stated. So there we have it. This is a beautiful picture of Kwame with President Kennedy. And I would just like to, as a side note here, something that Matt brought to my attention just the other day while I was doing my article, is that Kennedy actually began the processes of America getting involved in Africa economically in much the same way that China's Belt and Road Initiative is acting today. And wouldn't it be so great if America did that too? So Kennedy actually goes about beginning the discussion on a diplomatic level of America helping finance the hydroelectric power that Kwame is talking about in the speech that Cynthia just read. And that project was called the Volta River Dam. And it cost around $216 million at the time, and actually helped jumpstart the Ghanaian economy, at least, to getting them to a place where they could have sustainable and cheap electricity for the greater good of the people. Now, it wasn't an end in and of itself, of course, because it's just one hydro dam, but it was a symbolic project, and we can see the intention of Kennedy here. And had it been continued, had the tragedy not had happened, Africa would not look as it does today. And you also have to relate the assassination of Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Bobby as well to the assassination of the African leaders that embody those very same ideals. It's all part of the same trajectory. They are all being taken out because the empire has no other means of quelling this voice that now is not just Kennedy or Martin Luther, but is jumped all the way across to the largest continent on the planet and is spreading like wildfire. The only way, and this is how close we got, right? This is how actual close we got to a new paradigm. The only way they could stop it is with a gun or a random car crash or cancer out of nowhere after 60 years of good health. So, I mean, we'll all make our judgment individually, but I mean, it should be clear to most rational minds that, yeah, they had to bring about this chaos, they had to bring about this tragedy, and to first of all stop this path, and then secondary to that, basically teach all peoples who thought that they could be independent a lesson. And so after this period, we see a period of fear, and the Cold War rhetoric gets ramped up in a way which we hadn't seen before, and all those Pan-African leaders get labeled as communists or Marxists, and it all gets swept under the rug as one just, you know, random occurrence in history. Well, it wasn't. It was planned, and they did it as an operation. They were taken out. That was the way it was done, and that was the only way it could be done. But as Thomas Sankara and people around him said, and other people have said this in many different ways, you can kill a man, but you cannot kill his ideas. And so therefore, we are seeing the re-envisioning of this in the 80s with Sankara. We're also seeing it again today, right now, as we're living. So now I want to play short part, and I'm sorry, I really tried to find a good recording of this, but there is some music in the background and it is a bit off-putting and the recording is old. But just to get the spirit and the sense of what's taking place in Addis Ababa in 1963 at this OAU conference, the beginning of the African Union, you will see what Kwame is setting out here. And I'm going to start it at 4 minutes. Sorry. Sorry, can everybody hear that? No.
No.
Ah, what a shame.
Oh, but Nick, you can hook up your phone to speakers if you have it readily available and play it from your phone for us, and it'll work.
Great. That's a great idea. I can do that very quickly. Hang on. Kwame, where are you?
While you're doing that, Nick, I thought I would just point out as well one thing that Antoine Chaikin wrote about when dealing with Kwame Nkrumah and JFK, and it was a great paper called JFK versus the Empire. Is he pointed out that when the dam was finally unveiled, the Volta Dam, it had a plaque presented honoring JFK, which apparently still is there today at the base of the dam.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that. Okay, so I'm going to play this, and give me a thumbs up if you hear it, Matt.
You act of unity among ourselves.
Right,
We can agree for that.
So, move that. Play. And now play.
Chapter, a new arrangement for continental government. If we succeed in establishing a new set of principles as the basis of a new charter or statute for the establishment of a continental unit of Africa and the creation of social and political progress for our people, then, in my view, this conference should mark the end of our various groupings and regional blocks. But if we fail and let this grand and historic opportunity slip by, then we shall give way to greater dissension and division among us, for which the people, the masses of the people of Africa, will never forgive us. And the popular and progressive forces and movements within Africa will contaminate each other. I'm sure, therefore, that we shall not fail. Your Excellencies, I have spoken today because it is necessary for us all to explain.
The quality of sound has gone down.
So to our people,
The quality is not so good, Matt.
Not intelligible anymore.
All right then. So what I will do then is I mean, Cynthia already has read the transcript, which is actually in that speech, and also I took another part from that speech. So that very same speech is talking about everything we just spoke about before, the embodiment of Africa as a unified continent of autonomous nations working and coordinating together to create, bring about their independence, both spiritually and economically. Now, what time are we? 5:30. Matt, what time did we start, just to ask?
For you began speaking around 4:17.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to take you through then, as we do have time, the conversation that took place between Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill. Yeah, just to draw, you know, a parallel, and also I'm going to also read a second excerpt from Roosevelt where he talks about the Sahara in much the same way that Nkrumah did. So yes. Of course, Franklin remarked with a sly sort of assurance. Of course, after the war, one of the preconditions of any lasting peace will have to be the greatest possible freedom of trade. He paused. The Prime Minister's head, Prime Minister Churchill that is, was lowered. He was watching father steadily from under one eyebrow. No artificial barriers, Franklin pursued. As few favoured economic agreements as possible, opportunities for expansion, markets open for healthy competition. His eyes wandered innocently around the room. Churchill shifted in his armchair. The British trade empire agreements, he began heavily. Ah, father broke in. Yes, those empire trade agreements are a case in point. It's because of them that the people of India and Africa, of all the colonial Near East and Far East, are still as backward as they are. Churchill's neck reddened and he crouched forward. Mr. President, England does not propose for a moment to lose its favoured position among the British dominions. The trade that has made England great shall continue, and under conditions prescribed by England's ministers. You see, said Father slowly, it is along here somewhere that there is likely to be some disagreement between you, Winston, and me. I am firmly of the belief that if we are to arrive at a stable peace, it must involve the development of backward countries, backward peoples. How can this be done? It can't be done, obviously, by 18th century methods. Now, who's talking 18th century methods, says Churchill. Whichever of your ministers recommends a policy which takes wealth in raw materials out of the colonial country, but which returns nothing to the people of that country in consideration. 20th century methods involve bringing industry to these colonies. 20th century methods include increasing the wealth of the people by increasing their standard of living, by educating them, by bringing them sanitation, by making sure that they get a return for the raw wealth of their community. Around the room, all of us were leaning forward attentively. Hopkins was grinning. Commander Thompson, Churchill's aide, was looking glum and alarmed. The PM himself was beginning to look apoplectic. You mentioned India, he growled. Yes. I can't believe that we can fight a war against fascist slavery and at the same time not work to free people all over the world from a backward colonial policy. What about the Philippines? I'm glad you mentioned them. They get their independence, you know, in 1946. And they've gotten modern sanitation, modern education. Their rate of illiteracy has gone down steadily. Churchill said, there can be no tampering with the empire's economic agreements. Roosevelt said, they're artificial. Churchill says, they're the foundation of our greatness. The peace, said Roosevelt firmly, cannot include. The structure of the peace demands and will get equality of peoples. Equality of peoples involves the utmost freedom of competitive trade. Will anyone suggest that Germany's attempt to dominate trade in Central Europe was not a major contributing factor to the war? It was an argument that could have no resolution between these two men. He cried, I believe you are trying to do away with the British Empire. Every idea you entertain about the structure of the post-war world demonstrates it. But in spite of that, and his forefinger waved, in spite of that, we know that you constitute our only hope. And, his voice sank dramatically, you know that we know it. You know that we know that without America, the empire will not stand. Churchill admitted in that moment that he knew the peace could only be won according to precepts which the United States of America would lay down. And in saying what he did, he was acknowledging even that British colonial policy would be a dead duck, and British attempts to dominate world trade would be a dead duck too. And British ambitions to play off the USSR against the USA would also be a dead duck, or would have been, if Father had lived. So we see clearly there, you know, what Roosevelt's trying to do, and that sets, you know, like we've said many times today, it becomes clear as night and day eventually. The more you look into it, the more you do the research, that what Roosevelt's saying is what Nkrumah's saying, and what Nkrumah's saying is what Sankara is going to say, and so on and so forth. And the current leader of Kenya today, who's the son of Jomo Kenyatta, is saying the same thing, and he's being ripped to shreds in the Kenyan media, which is controlled by British empirical forces that are still managing to, you know, use their invisible hand to use the suffering of peoples in Kenya and that live in the slums and so on and so forth to get them angry and frustrated and go about creating Jacobin mobs and bring about that duly elected government so that they stymie their progress. I mean, it's the same old theme. So now I'm going to read another excerpt where, you know, it's from the same book as he saw it, which was written by Elliot Roosevelt, his son. This is where he talks about the Sahara, and you'll notice a parallel with basically what Nkrumah was saying.
Nick, sorry, quick. Are we supposed to see the quotes in front of our faces, or is this just what you're reading?
This is just what I'm reading because I have decided to add it in.
Okay.
So yeah. But I will shift us to a different screen. So yeah, here we see Kennedy again with another African leader. I found loads of pictures of Kennedy with African leaders, by the way. So that also paints a very detailed picture of the processes, diplomatic especially, that were taking place, and the organizing that was taking place, and the economic involvement of America on the African continent in their development. But here I'm going to read another thing from Roosevelt. Sadly, I didn't manage to get it up there, but it's on record. Over coffee, he got back on the theme of the development of colonial areas, increasingly one of his favorite topics. For a man who had never been in Africa before, he had picked up an amazing amount of information, geographical, geological, agricultural. Of course, I thought I knew the country pretty well. I had flown over a good bit of it months before, photographing it from the air. But somewhere he had had the chance to learn even more than I had. We discussed the great salt flats in southern Tunisia, which must have at one time been a vast inland sea. He reminded us of the rivers that spring up in the Atlas Mountains to the south and disappear under the Sahara to become subterranean rivers. He said, divert this water flow for irrigation purposes. It'd make the Imperial Valley in California look like a cabbage patch. And the salt flats, they were below the level of the Mediterranean. You could dig a canal straight back to recreate that lake 150 miles long, 60 miles wide. The Sahara would bloom for hundreds of miles. End quote. It is true. The Sahara is not just sand. It has an amazingly rich potential. Every time there is rain, there is a consequent riot of flowers for a few days before the dryness and the sun kill them off. Franklin and I winked at each other. Father was having the time of his life, his active mind and quick imagination working overtime as we all speculated on what intelligent planning could do for this land. Wealth, he cried. Imperialists don't realize what they can do, what they can create. They've robbed this continent of billions and all understand that their billions were pennies compared to the possibilities that must include a better life for the people who inhabit this land. So, end quote. And again, the link is made, and Nkrumah is following this guide. And we see Nkrumah here in the top left of this picture with Muhammad Ali, looking fabulous in his African outfit. We see here Nkrumah with his good friend in Guinea. Ahmed Sekou Touré. So Nkrumah was the guy. I mean, he's really like Roosevelt in that sense that he's going around organizing people. He's the guy with the vision as well. And yeah, he's very active in how he goes about bringing that vision to light. And that is why he created the Organization for the African Union, so that there would be a platform, one, for him to present this vision, and two, to organize it, to get the other African nations on board and to create a kind of federation. So here are some more quotes that I'm going to invite people to read. Two of them are from Sheikh Anta Diop, who is the scientist I was talking about, and you'll get some insights into his philosophy and thinking here. And also one is from Haile Selassie. Do I have any takers? Please.
I vote for Stephen.
I was just about to volunteer.
Take it away, Stephen.
Okay, am I starting at the without a systematic reference, or the bit
Yeah,
before that?
if you do the bit before, do both of Sheikh Anta Diop's, and then someone else can do Haile Selassie's.
Okay, well, I'll start. Then if no one wants to do the second part, I'll do that as well, but no worries.
Great.
The formation of a federated and unified Africa, culturally and otherwise, is the only way for Africa to become the power in the world that she should rightfully be. Cheikh Anta Diop, if I pronounce that correctly.
Yeah.
And shall I just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. Without a systematic reference to Egypt, there can be no true cultural renaissance in Africa. After all, what is our objective if it is not that of recovering and promoting the creativity of our peoples? Man's mission is creation. African Renaissance, Black Renaissance, is inseparable from the restoration of the Black world's creativity. To assume his destiny, man must be a creator irrespective of his race. The loss of our national sovereignty strangled our, okay, and I can't read the bottom line because it's cut off on my screen.
Strangled our independent creativity.
Right, okay, Cheikh Anta Diop. And then
yeah, go for it on the next one as well, Stephen. Why
okay, I had to shift the little window with your glorious image, Nick. And here we go.
Go for it.
That until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion, to be pursued but never attained. And until the ignoble and unhappy regimes that hold our brothers in Angola, in Mozambique, and in South Africa in subhuman bondage have been toppled and destroyed, until bigotry and prejudice and malicious and inhuman self-interest have been replaced by understanding and tolerance and goodwill, until all Africans stand and speak as free beings, equal in the eyes of all men as they are in the eyes of heaven. Until that day, the African continent will not know peace. We Africans will fight if necessary, and we know that we shall win, as we are confident in the victory of good over evil. Haile Selassie.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And like I mentioned before, Haile Selassie, he was somewhat of a philosopher king, which would be great to do another class on him another time. But like I say, he was a king, and he was brilliant. So yeah. So I think we see, again, clearly the intention here. I just want to draw people to something. I mean, I don't know if I've already mentioned it. I know I've spoken a lot, but this is how, you know, empires, they don't mind revolutionary violence. You know, they're all for a bit of violence. And that's generally how they've managed to throw it off course. But what they're really afraid of is revolutionary economics. And when a nation embodies those principles, then they have to act fast, because if you embody Hamilton's economics, as we saw in the United States of America, the rate of progress that will happen will be rapid and will be like what China is today, termed as a human miracle, because we're not used to it. So that's why we call it a miracle, because like our senses are not used to those kind of rates of progress. But if we actually had a worldwide Hamiltonian economic system, the rates of progress, well, we'd make more progress probably in the next 5 years than we have done in the past 50. That would probably be a reasonable gauge to give that. Lyndon LaRouche, for example, would probably say more, actually, but that's due to his higher understanding of those economics and the processes that are embodied in them. So that's really what the empire is afraid of, and that's why with you know, Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, Sheikh Anta Diop, who was also a massive threat to the empire. Yeah, they had to go about in a very drastic way getting rid of them. So here I'm going to read another quote from Sheikh Anta Diop, just because I was having so much fun with him before this class, and I just thought, well, he's so brilliant, let's keep on going. So, quote, basic research will always remain essentially a university concern. Therefore, right at the start, the university will be rightfully entitled to claim the required funds for the construction of high-energy accelerators. For example, to contribute to the further elucidation of elemental particles, behavior of matter at high levels of energy, and other such problems. If we wish to see the African nation everyone is talking about these days adapt itself to the needs of the modern technical world, we have, from its very beginning, to provide those technical institutions that guarantee the life of a modern nation. So here he sets out those principles, what they need. We should forthwith create the following institutes. This is what gaining your independence really is. An institute of nuclear chemistry and physics. Bear in mind that the empire didn't want people to study physics. It's a particular part of science that they actually try systematically to stop people from studying. They don't want people to make new physical discoveries of the universe. It's a real sticking point for them. They want people to focus on social sciences because that serves their ends, but they are not happy about physics. An electronics institute, an aeronautics and astronautics institute, an institute of applied chemistry for industry and agriculture, an institute of tropical agronomy and biochemistry, and an institute of health specialized in the study of tropical diseases. Well, had Sheikh Anta Diop had his way, you could probably imagine that we wouldn't be going through this pandemic right now. I know it's Africa and not China, but they're still the same. It's about higher standards of living, and if we're not moving to higher standards of living, at some point nature will find ways to, will create at will, as it does, and we will not be ready to combat that potential hazard to our health. We know that not all viruses are actually, shared by humans. Some of them by animals, but when it does become human transmitted, we have to already be able to respond to the problem before the problem is there. It's like trying to fix something 2 steps behind it. It's better that we create, as Sheikh Anta Diop is saying here, these institutes, have it already set up. And this is what real independence is. If you have these foundations, if you have a nation, a modern nation state set up on these parameters, you're going to be able to overcome any single obstacle. And that's what independence is, right? At the end of the day, like how can I, as an individual in my nation, be independent in the way that I go about fixing this, like creating the solution to the problem? Well, literacy is a starter. Like if I cannot read, write, or speak, I will not have any independence whatsoever. That's one reason why empire needs to keep Africa, dumbed down, because Africa has the youngest population on the planet. If they all learn to read, write, and speak, what's that going to unleash? Well, it's going to unleash the natural will of the human spirit, the human soul, to discover and to take on new knowledge. And if you have 1.4 billion people doing this, and they're all below the age of 30, what's going to happen? And so this is what's happening right now, right? This is why the attack against the Belt and Road Initiative, which is what I'm going to move into now, because they've got to find a way to stop this. And this is where it becomes, I hope it becomes apparent to everyone that they will go to war for this. If it comes down to it, it's no different than before. The theme hasn't changed. They will do what is necessary to stop this process. It's the only method that they know. So as that is a principle, the only way we can overcome it is through a coordinated response internationally to bring about the end of empirical economics, because basically that's what we're attacking here. I don't really care for opinions or conjectures. What I care for are the fundamentals. If we change the economics, it's a done deal. And that's the part that we never have actually quite managed to solve. We never, you know, with all the leaders that tried, they either got assassinated or, you know, so as we already found. But and that will normally happen when if an individual takes a stand alone, they become a shooting target. So it becomes very easy. And Sankara, who we're gonna hear now, actually, he actually went to the OAU conference later in 1985, I think, 2 years before his death. And he again does what Nkrumah does, and he sets out his vision for a federal United States of Africa or something along these lines. And he says to them, like, if you don't join with me in this call, I will not return to this conference next time. So he receives in the conference, of course, due to the stimulating ability of his voice and his words, everyone's clapping, and you know, they're very, very raucous and loving what they hear. The moment they leave the conference, or you know, as the weeks and the months go by after, fear kicks in, and they all they basically don't join Sankara in his call. And 1987, Sankara gets assassinated. And again, we see the very sudden death of that vision again. And just to note as well, Burkina Faso is still suffering from ridiculous amounts of poverty, which would be ended by now had Sankara lived and managed to carry out his vision. Now, I'm not I'm not someone to prophesize, but it's just based on the principle of what was being actively pursued, because it wasn't just words, it was actively being pursued at the time, that they were going to enforce these economic principles that were going to raise the standards of living for entire nations. So he spoke a lot about literacy, because he was like, you know, what can we do without these basic foundations of a modern state? The only trouble is, as we found in the video before, I don't know if you guys will hear this, but again, I'm going to give it a try and you can let me know. So let me just find it on YouTube and I will play it through the speakers. What is this? It's this one. Okay.
C'est ça l'impérialisme. Suffisamment de quoi nous nourrir. Nous pouvons dépasser notre production, malheureusement. Par manque d'organisation, nous sommes encore obligés de faire dans la tête pour demander des aides alimentaires. Ces aides alimentaires qui nous bloquent, qui nous inspirent, qui installent dans nos esprits cette habitude, ces réflexes de mendiant, d'assister. Nous devons mettre de côté ces aides par notre grande production. Il faut réussir à produire plus. Produire plus. Produire plus parce que il est normal que celui qui vous donne à manger vous dicte également ses volontés. Nous consommons que ce que nous contrôlons. Il y en a qui demandent mais où se trouve l'impérialisme. L'impérialisme, regardez dans vos assiettes, quand vous mangez les grains de riz, de maïs, de mil importés, c'est ça l'impérialisme, n'allez pas plus loin. N'allons pas plus loin. Qui ici ne souhaite pas que la dette soit purement et simplement effacée? Celui qui ne le souhaite pas, il peut sortir, prendre son avion et aller tout de suite à la Banque mondiale payer. Tous nous souhaitons Notre conférence adopte la nécessité de dire clairement qu'il ne faut pas payer la dette. Non pas dans un esprit belliqueux. Ceci pour éviter que nous allions individuellement nous faire assassiner.
So I just want to note that here you see Sankara making the same call that is being made right now as we speak by Ahmed Abe of Ethiopia and Ramaphosa of South Africa. They are both calling on the IMF for debt cancellation and debt restructuring and for the interest rates to be renegotiated. We are talking about decades-old debt that the World Bank and the IMF, or I should say, enforced on them. And this gives you an idea of how long this has been going on. This is 85, I think, where we're talking here. Nkrumah is in the 60s. Yeah, time lost. Let's continue.
Si le Burkina Faso tout seul refuse de payer la dette, je ne serai pas là à la prochaine conférence. Par contre, avec le soutien de tous, quand j'ai besoin, et quand nous disons que la dette ne saurait être payée, ce n'est point que nous sommes contre la morale, la dignité, le respect de la parole. Parce que nous estimons que nous n'avons pas la même morale que les autres. Entre le riche et le pauvre, il n'y a pas la même morale. La Bible, le Coran, ne peut pas servir de la même manière celui qui exploite le peuple et celui qui est exploité. Il faudrait alors qu'il y ait deux éditions de la Bible et deux éditions du Coran. Chers frères, avec le soutien de tous,
So I'm going to stop that there. It's 12 minutes long, the speech, so if anybody wants, they can go and watch it after themselves. It's very, gives you a lot of insight into the man, and I understand that on the surface, like I said before, sometimes these guys, due to their sensuality and the fact that he's in militant clothing, like you might, you know, on first appearances be like, oh, he's just another socialist or whatever. Bear in mind, the guy is like 35 years old. I mean, he's still quite young, and like I say, the situation required an attention to social reform. So, but he says very clearly, and he's talking about the debt, and he's saying, you know, as I said before, like anybody who doesn't see this as what is it he says? Anybody who doesn't wish to cancel the debt, like please be my guest and go to the World Bank and pay it for us, and because we all agree on the same thing. Like he's not saying that we should just cancel it because for the sake of canceling. You're saying we should cancel it because we can't pay it. Like it's not that we're immoral or like that we don't want to do these things. We want to cancel the debt because our people are dying and we can't actually pay the debt. Like if people saw the interest rates that the World Bank and the IMF is putting on these loans, and if everybody saw it, the whole system would crumble tomorrow. Like the whole financial system would be pulled down in one big Jacobin mob because people would be so enraged that this is going on and that the poverty of Africa is not some whimsical, you know, random act. That actually, in fact, this continent is the wealthiest and richest continent on our planet, and the only thing keeping them in poverty is Adam Smith's free trade system. Globalism. That's the only thing. These people left to their own ends, if they've been like, and I really mean that, like, because people, I don't mean to say like we shouldn't then interfere. That's not what I mean at all. I'm just saying, if the empire had never interfered in the naturally occurring events that were taking place on the continent, it would not, like, we would not be in the reality we're in now. Africa would not be where it is right now. They would be some of the most wealthy nations on our planet, and we'd be living an entirely different reality. It's very difficult to paint a picture for you, but I mentioned before, like Congo being one of the richest nations on the planet, around $30 trillion or estimated wealth is below Congo's ground. America's debt is $24 trillion, growing exponentially. So, you know, there you go. I'm going to finish this because I want to move on to the Belt and Road Initiative. Gaddafi took the concept of the United States of Africa, a unified federation of the 55 sovereign states of Africa, and put it into action. He was one of the last remaining Pan-African leaders who hadn't yet been killed back in 2009. He was the first African leader to propose and work towards a unified passport system, one African currency, which was going to be gold-backed, and Pan-African trade blocs to establish an independent unified economy. His own nation of Libya was one of the most successful nations in Africa due solely to their independence from European influence. When Gaddafi came to power, not necessarily like Mugabe, but at least centrally like Mugabe, ended virtually all relations with the West in favor of building alliances with his own people and Arabs. Mugabe and Gaddafi are two very different people, by the way. But yeah. He was the best hope for a true United States of Africa until he was assassinated by the United States of America, ironically, in a coup d'etat, which was led by the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton. I'm sure we all remember her crazily celebrating live on TV that we killed him. I think that was her quote. We saw, he died. That was it. And her cackle that comes after that, oh God, shakes the halls of fear. So that's that. And Gaddafi is, the reason he was taken out is for the same reason. I'm not saying that the man was perfect. I'm sure anybody here could go and find, certain bad things about any single one of these leaders, actually. Even Nkrumah, he's at one point flirting with dictatorship because of the problems with political chaos that he's living. So the empire is finding all the ways till Sunday, as they like to say, to throw off the process of Ghana's independence. So that was happening then, and so to counter that, Nkrumah had to basically have a more centralized hand over the government. And you saw purges and things like this start to take place because, of course, there was betrayal going on in the halls of power, and people were getting corrupted towards the empire's wishes and so on and so forth. With Gaddafi, it wasn't so easy, and in the end, they just had to do what they always do. Actually, they couldn't assassinate him at first. It was too hard. His security team was too good. They couldn't get in. So then it became a war. They put in the no-fly zone, I think in 2009, and from there on out, it was, we all saw what happened and what a tragedy that was. So this is the West's version of democracy today. It's not real. It's an illusion. Nothing is going on. And this is, on the left, what this Western version of democracy has brought about in Africa by continually interfering in their affairs, basically, and never interfering in a moral way, but always interfering in a selfish way. And on the right, this picture is actually taken from the Schiller Institute. It's one of my favorites in one of the very brilliant books that they delivered, the World Land Bridge Report. On the right is 2050. You might notice that great big black hole in the middle. That is Lake Chad, or what Lake Chad should look like if the Lake Chad Commission has its way in Nigeria. Right now, there's already, I'm going to talk a bit about that because now we're going to move into infrastructure, and I'm going to blaze through it because it is 6:10 and I don't want to keep you for too long. But this is now to contrast with everything that has happened up until now with China's Belt and Road Initiative, and that we'll get through that quite fast. So this is what Africa can and should become by 2050 if the processes that are currently taking place continue. So we have an opportunity here, much like Nkrumah and the people of Africa had in the 60s, and again in the 80s, and again it's being re-envisioned here. So we have to make sure that basically this Belt and Road Initiative is not only stymied or put off, but even better yet, that America joins, or at least creates its own American Belt and Road Initiative as not as a counter to China's, but as an extended option, so to speak. So that would be brilliant. And already, when we look at what China has invested into Africa, I'm just going to bring this down here so we have a better. And by the way, sorry, this is a picture which is taken at night, so it gives you a very clear description of the. This is in relation to basically energy flux density, or the formula that the economic formula that Lin discovered, and it shows very clearly that basically when the lights go out on this planet, we see very clearly how energy is used, where it's centralized, and the control of energy on our planet. And in 2015, well, that's Africa, which is a tragedy, still waiting to be corrected, being corrected by China and India and others. And on the right, that's what Lyndon LaRouche's vision, and most probably China's as well, and now it's part of actually the African Union's 2063 vision as well. So they have a similar, very similar map and plan as what is found in the World Land Bridge, actually. So this is, I'm going to make this smaller. This is China's infrastructure projects. I'm going to blaze through these, yeah? So on the left, we have here, this is Lamu Port in Kenya. It's on the northern coast of Kenya. It's part of an integrational development plan called LAPSET. That's the abbreviation for it, which is shared between the countries Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda, and I think that's it. So it's a development proposal for these 5 nations. It's basically a transport corridor consisting of ports, railways, roads, hospitals, schools, you name it. And so I'm giving you a little glimpse into that. So this is the port. It's actually the first 3 berths that are being built. They just got finished literally about 3 weeks ago. It got finished, what was it? It was supposed to be done in September this year. And even though we're going through a pandemic, they managed to finish it 8 weeks ahead of schedule. That's the Chinese for you. They normally do finish ahead of schedule. Keep on telling them they should update their schedules. Then on the right here, we have the Nairobi SGR, which I've personally had the luxury and pleasure of riding on. It's the standard gauge railway in Kenya, the first one that has been built in 120 years since the Lunatic Express that was built by the British, my lovely homeland. And yeah, again, look at it, beautiful, it's like a spaceship. So that train goes around 150 kilometers an hour. It's diesel for now due to the lack of energy or electricity in Kenya, but they are hoping by next year already actually to switch it over to the electricity grid. In the bottom left, we have Mombasa Port, which is part of that SGR train. So that train that you see here on the right, or that station, the train line behind it, that goes that way all the way to Mombasa, and it comes through here to Mombasa Port on the way to the city to pick up all the cargo and so forth. Another thing to mention is that in Kenya and in most of the world, it's about 1/3 cheaper to transport your goods by train than by lorry. It also saves you, it's also about 1/3 of the time. So that's to give you an idea of the instant ramifications of when infrastructure just literally turns on like that and becomes complete and goes into function. The standards of living jump. They don't gradually increase, they jump for the 55 million citizens of Kenya, and also the surrounding nations of that country as well, which will eventually join on with this SGR and share in that prosperity. And this is Jomo Kenyatta in the bottom right opening the SGR on its first day. Built by the Chinese for $3.4 billion. has a 25-year loan. The interest rate is below 3%. They had a 5-year grace period for the first 5 years where they didn't pay a thing. Those are some of the loan agreements that I can share with you. Let's move on to another country. Oh, yeah, sorry, no, this is still Kenya. I wanted to show you the other stations. So it's not just the capital that they go large on. They go large, full stop. The Chinese don't do small. They don't do ugly either, by all appearances. So this is Mombasa terminus in the left. This is because they just did the second phase of that SGR. They just finished it again ahead of schedule in July. That was last year, actually. I'm already losing track of the time. They're doing it so fast, I can't keep up. I don't think anyone can. You need a whole team of people following this stuff to keep up. So that here in the top right, you see this is the second phase. Someone has wrote hashtag 2A is here. You can, the excitement is palpable. Mariakani is another station that's just outside of Mombasa. And Voi station, this is, Voi is actually a very famous place in Kenya where people traditionally take off to go and do safari and stuff. So for the economy at large, tourism, all those kind of things, it's going to have a massive effect on. Also, just wanted to mention that when I took the train, the direct trip, it's a 540 kilometer journey. The direct trip is around $6–7. So cheap. And affordable. And I can tell you every time we've gotten on a train, and from statistics, in the first year of operations, the train had a 92% complete capacity. Obviously, because of the pandemic that just took place, this has affected its operations, but not as much as you would think. Because it's new infrastructure, it's very easy to, when you have new infrastructure, it even helps the pandemic because it's very easy to enforce certain protocols and social distancing and whatnot. If you have old infrastructure and you have cramped hallways, doesn't really help, does it? You know, like you've got cramped toilets, you know, everyone's bowling over one seat, you know. New infrastructure just basically raises the standards of not just transport, everything. I always take pictures of the toilets because I know it's funny, but it gives people a very good insight as to standards of living. Like, toilets are a very important thing for us. We use it daily. It's part of our lives. So whenever I go into new infrastructure, the toilets for me are a standard of how well they finished it. Because often, like, you know, it'll become like be a second thought. But whenever I've gone into these stations, everything's pristine, like pristine. This is now Nigeria. So on the top left here, we have the new trains. These are very, very new that have just been delivered to Nigeria from China. And the one on the right here is that train in operation. So because Nigeria has a little bit more money at its disposal and they have a bigger economy than most, they still have rampant levels of poverty, but they're really shifting things into gear, you know, 7, 8, and really pushing right now in a very coordinated way through the states to build infrastructure at a really incredible rate. So this train line is the Lagos Abuja Kano rail line. Has an operating speed as a starter for 160 to 200 kilometers. That's faster than most British trains, by the way. On the bottom left here, we have Lekki Port, deep sea port in the south of Nigeria, near the Niger Delta. And then on the right there in the bottom, that is Abuja Airport, just also recently completed in 2016. They finished 5 airports in Nigeria simultaneously in the same summer. They each cost between $300 and $500 million. They were all built by the CCECC, which is a Chinese state infrastructure corporation. Again, the loans that were, you know, used for that infrastructure were of a very moral standard. Don't take my word for it. You know, you can go check it out. I could, I mean, there are some websites that I can share with the group after for people if they want to get more stats and info on that. Here is for anybody who thinks that this is a new form of colonization, I just want to show you some pictures of Chinese and African workers working on these infrastructure. This is not propaganda as much as it may appear to be. I have seen this in the flesh. I have sensed it with my own 2 eyes. I understand that there is a lot of cynicism in the world today due to the pain and suffering we have endured, but this is a new standard of behavior, and we're witnessing it. So you can see not just building infrastructure, we're talking transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology, we're talking about transfer in the first place, a transfer which gives these people the independence that they need, the knowledge that they need to go and do these things by themselves. The Chinese won't be necessary forever, you know, and it won't look so weird if everybody gets involved. The only reason it looks like, you know, China is dominating is because, well, they are. They're the only ones bloody doing it. I mean, come on. So next one, this is in contrast. So just, you know, to give you some stark contrasts. On the right, we have the Mau Mau Rebellion. That's a concentration camp in Kenya that the British Empire set up. On the left, this is a South African mining industry picture. They couldn't even be bothered to clothe them. Wow. So, happy, sad, happy, sad. Okay, I'm going to continue. This is Senegal, top left. This is the new international airport. New, everything's new right now in Africa. Everything coming big and broad and pretty and colorful, and with their cultural imprint as well. It's wonderful. So, international, Blaise Diagne, he's also a very famous leader of Senegal. I didn't mention him, but he's there. This is inside the airport on the right hand side here. You can see when they built this airport, they didn't just build the airport because of course then nobody could get to it, right? No, they built the train from Dakar to the airport as well. It's a 40-kilometer trip, I think, 37 kilometers or something. So the train that you see here is also part of that airport project. They don't build things in singularities. It's like transport corridors. This is coordinated. It's not just infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. This is a coordinated national development. On the bottom left, that's the bird's eye view of the airport. And on the bottom right here, we have the new Dakar Arena. This was actually built as a grant from the Chinese government. They essentially did it for free as a gift. And yeah, it's a modern multi-purpose stadium, and it's finished, as you can see. So again, it's beautiful. No, they'll use that to hold modern, you know, international sporting events and increase their tourism ability, and basically also to change the perception of Africa, because people still think these people, like everyone in Africa is, you know, living off $2 a month and, you know, bleeding the goat dry by now, I should imagine. So that's not the case anymore. And, you know, it's about time that people change their perception if we're gonna get on this. This country is, where am I? Tanzania. So on the top left here, this is the Tanzania Standard Gauge Railway being built not by China. Not by China. Okay, so it's not just the Chinese. It's being built by Yapi Maketsi, who's a Turkish contractor. They're very brilliant at their work, as you can see. Turkey has also made a shift in its thinking. It's causing quite a problem for NATO at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware. They're not quite sure what to do about it either, it appears. But yes, Turkey's made a conscious choice, conscious moral choice to help Africa as well. And they see that by doing that, you know, there's a lot to be gained. This is not charity. There's a lot of money to be made. It's not charity, guys. Still business, but just good business, moral business. There is such a thing. Below we have the Julius Nyerere International Airport Terminal 3. Julie and I went to Tanzania about 7 years ago. When we landed there, the airport was infiltrated with mosquitoes. It was humid, it was sweaty, it was dirty, it was horrid. No more. It's all pristine, shining, 8 bays for international planes to land in with air conditioning and toilets and all sorts. It's brilliant. That's another picture of the airport on the right. And this bridge is the bridge that just got finished this spring in Dar es Salaam. It's another example. So that's all in Tanzania. Then this is a mixture of Uganda and Rwanda, which is interesting because not so long ago they were having a really torrid time with Idi Amin and Museveni being genocidalists and not caring so much about their people, but things have changed. That's the Matt and I were talking about this not so long ago, like the irony in people, like, yeah, they can be bad, but then they see a good thing happening and they somehow get swept up in the whole, literally. I mean, they can't help it because the wave, you could say, or in this case, the tsunami of development that is taking place, it becomes so attractive for anybody centrally that you'd be nuts to turn it down, wouldn't you? I mean, any one of us would love for these things to be built in Canada or Australia, like, you know, other places which have not been developed to the possible standards that could be. So yeah, same principles here. So this is a bridge here. This is the Ginger Nile Bridge. This is in yes, Uganda, I think. Or is it Sudan? Anyway, it was built. It's brilliant. It's done in 2016. It's also one of the few crossings across the Nile, so it's very important for the movement of cargo and trade, and also for the movement of people, for the transfer of information. These are the roads that are being built in Kigali, Rwanda. They have taken the choice to do an entire city of new roads. So they have, in the past 5 years, Paul Kagame, again, he was someone who came out of the University of Dar es Salaam with that weird thinking. He's actually done a turnaround and is no longer, you know, listening to the empire and is following now an independent vision for Rwanda. And these are the roads that he's been building, his government's been building. So no longer is he hated as much as he was before. It's almost a miracle, you could say. Now we're not done, you know, it's not done, but like long way to go still. But these are some of the, I'm just showing you some of the very real things that these are all real. None of these are architect's drawings. And all of those roads there are Kigali, Rwanda, which is the capital city of Rwanda. This is Egypt. And I chose this particular one, because it's the extension of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was a particular point of interest for the British Empire. It was one of their ways that they could continue to enforce economic control over Africa by controlling the flow of trade and the flow of information. So this was the way that they did it. Bear in mind that Egypt and Britain fought a war over the Suez Canal in 1963, I think I'm right in saying that. So it's quite significant, and they built a 100-kilometer extension in a year to the date with the use of the Egyptian military. El-Sisi is quite an astute economic planner as well. So they used the military to do that. The way that they funded the money for it is they basically did public contracts where the people of Egypt could buy a contract or a bond, so to speak, for the infrastructure. And the government would then receive that money. And now all the people of Egypt who invested in the extension of the Suez Canal hold a contract. A part of that asset is in their own independent hands. So the people of Egypt actually own, they actually physically own the extension of the Suez Canal. And here you see some pictures of it. This is yeah, military plane celebrating it. That's the opening of it on, I think it's August 17th, 2016 or 17. And you see the ships going down it, how well it's being used. Of course, it's a Suez Canal. Around 1/3 of world trade passes through here every year. So it's important, to say the least. The bottom left picture is them dredging it. So you can imagine how much sand had to be shifted. And like I say, there would have been no other way of doing it had they not used the military. Only militaries have that kind of coordination and are able to take action in such a way, in such a linear, fast way. This is Nigeria, and I chose this one because they are literally building a new city from the ground up on the edge of Lagos, on what was previously the sea. There are no boundaries to what we can do. So this is called Eco-Atlantic City. Behind it, you will see that's Lagos, which up until recently had a major problem with rising sea levels and flooding. And so they built this city as a very positive response to that, to act as a natural barrier. And they've actually, this wall that you can kind of see along here on the bottom right picture, is called the Great Wall of Lagos. Now it's been coined the Great Wall of Lagos. It's going to act, it's I think it's about 5 meters above sea level, the rocks, and it acts as a very natural barrier to the inflow of water and to protect Lagos from more soil erosion and so on and so forth. So by doing this, they not only save the city, but they raise the standards of living for everyone. They also create space for the people residing in this, one of the densest cities in the world. Bear in mind, Lagos has around 17 million people, if I'm correct. And they will have now the space to move into this newer city, so that then the government can go about fixing where they were living before. So by creating the space and by literally reclaiming the land from the sea, they're restoring the city to its once former size. And also by doing that and doing it with new infrastructure, because this is, you know, it's not just buildings, it's sewage, it's fiber optics, it's this, you know, clean drinking water, you know, not old pipe networks, all of the things that come, which we take for granted, which most people don't think about, are being put in brand new. So we're talking tens of billions of dollars are being invested into this Eco-Atlantic City. It's also pulling in loads of foreign direct investment. So that's also a good thing. Here on the left, you see the marina. This is the architect's vision of the marina, what it will be eventually. So they're getting close. And on the top right there, that's one of the multi-use developments that is already built. They're called Echo Pearl Towers. Yeah, I will continue. Or maybe that's it. So I want to finish with my last paragraph from my article, just as a reminder for today's class. That is, I know that throughout all of this lesson, the paradoxes are very hard to swallow at times. But independence has to be won by the people, for the people, and of the people, and in no other manner. Independence cannot be given, it must be taken, for when the oppressed have no reasonable solution to the oppressor, then a struggle ensues, and those which are just shall rise from the chaos and lead entire peoples and nations to glory. Let's hope that this is Africa's future, present, and that we've learned from our lessons of the past as we've gone over today, and we don't repeat them, because right now we're faced with an opportunity of a lifetime in the form of Trans-Belt Road Initiative. All we need to make happen is that the international cooperation moves to the same standard. So let's move to that standard and get this continent out of poverty. Thank you everyone for listening, and yeah.
Tukameka pakwingira mubusuma wa emba. 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 Tukashana 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 pakwingira mubusuma wa emba. Tukalira nangeri kumulu 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 mubusuma wa emba. Tukalira